Nations were able to accept United States accreditation. And that was United States present, that they are officially representative of the United States and present that document. So if we begin to show what we have as an accreditation, that what make us, the world is not going to stand and proclaim us, but what we do is what makes us to be recognized. And that is essential that Southern Cameroon start to talk about this as essentially and implement it as a on the question of the Ambazonia defense system. On the question of the Ambazonia defense system. Let's look. Remember that British government has always been a fraud against the people's freedom. For example, the British government allowed us to have our own police system. And that's why you have the Southern Cameroon police force. I think I have it on my Facebook account. If you are looking at my Facebook, you have the Southern Cameroon police force and their uniform. So the British government, that's the fraud the British government made. British government claimed that they're going to provide security. British government claimed they're going to provide the people of Southern Cameroon security. And that is why they allowed us to have the police force. But they didn't allow us to have the defense force because they thought they are going to provide us security. And so we had our police force, and the police force were providing security. But on the external aggression, the British government thought they forced us to believe, make us to believe that in the case of a foreign aggression, they are going to protect us, in which they never did. And that's why we find ourselves, we never have a defense force. The people of Southern Cameroon, they never have the military defense force because the British administrative authority that the British Marine is going to provide security. And so, if the United Nations, that those territories that were being prepared for independence should be prepared for, they should have been preparing us for our defense force, which they never. And so that's why we find ourselves in this misery. But however, the error can be corrected. So on the question of the LGA by LGA, I want to make this clear. The current structure we have in Ambazonia, the LGA by LGA, doesn't provide the avenue of the separate arm of government. It doesn't. It doesn't provide us a separate arm of government. How can we have a separate arm of government? We have to have a legislative, judiciary, and the executive. Those are the three arms of government that are supposed to be independent. So when you have the LGA by LGA, it's the lowest level for those who are familiar with the federal structure here in the United States. If you haven't, then you might want to take a listening to these messages. It's very important. The county by county is the lowest level of government here in the United States. And if we were to follow the federal structure, United States would be a role model for us to follow and implementing the structure systematically. So if we are calling ourselves Federal Republic of Ambazonia, so what makes us a federal? So because we don't have a state yet, so there is a vacancy. There is a vacancy within our structure of Ambazonia. Because if we have to go by LGA as we know, then there is a vacancy because we don't have a state. So what is the state? So the problem that we have down the road is that if we allow the structure of LGA by LGA to remain as it is, I know many people will look at it, oh, you are criticizing. No, I am giving an effective that we need to institute. We need to institute this now before it become overwhelmed in the future. So I am bringing things that could prevent future down the road. And that is why it is essential for those who always ignore that, oh, you are criticizing. I am not criticizing, but I am giving you a fact, concrete facts, that once we implement those concrete facts, it makes us become more powerful. The LGA by LGA we have, there is no federal structure if we are to follow the United States structure. So, what is a federal government? A federal government, because United States as a model that we have, United States is made up of 50 to 51 states. And in those states, each state has a separate government that almost like a mirror image of the central government of the federal government of the United States. So the state government is a mirror image of the central government of the federal government of the United States. So it has the same structure, but it's separate by the laws of the book. Let's look at the federal government of the United States. The federal government, you have the executive, the judiciary, and the legislature. So the executive, which is President Donald Trump, and the vice president are the member of the executive branch of the federal government of the United States. And you go down the line, you look at the legislative. The legislative is, you have the Congress, and the Congress, you have the Senate, which is the branch of another arm of government of the United States. And you have the judiciary. The judiciary, you have the Supreme Court, you have the Federal Secretary, and you have the Attorney General. Those are the third branch of the federal government of the United States. So those are the federal government. So why is it called a federal government? Because are the government that supersede the 51 or the 50 to 51 state of the United States. So that's why it's called the federal government of the 51 to 51 states. So now let's look at the structure of the state. Let's look at the structure of the state. So the structure of the state, you have the governor. And you also have the Supreme Court of the state, which is different from the federal court. So there is a federal state court, Supreme Court, and there is a federal Supreme Court. So they said the law of the federal government supersedes that of the state. So when in the case where the conflict of law, of interest of the state government, the federal government's law supersedes the state law. And that is the differences. So now let's look at, you have the governor, you have the attorney general, the attorney of the state is different from the attorney general of the state. It's different from the attorney general of the federal government of the United States. So indirectly, the state has its own structure equivalent like the structure of the federal government. But it is a subordinate to the federal government of the United States. Let's say there is a problem. The federal government, if the state asks the federal government to back up that there is some problem here, the federal government will immediately dissent. But if in a case where there is a conflict of law, the federal government will supersede. But now on the case, and after the state, you have what they call the county. And after the county, you also have the city. So the county is the lowest level in the branch of government of the United States. So if we implement the county and then we call ourselves a federation, then we are this discrepancy of the federal structure of our government. And so let's say if we were to have our Ambazonian defense system now. So we will call the federal Ambazonia, because if we allow the Ambazonian government, if we allow the Ambazonian, the LGA by LGA, where there is a vacancy between the state, and it becomes so powerful, and down the road we create a federal structure to control the county by county, then the people will revolt. And that is create a burden to our own government that we created, that we failed to foresee and solve the problem before it even happened. So, and immediate duty of us is to see what could potentially happen in the future and prevent it before it even happened. So, for example, let's say we have LGA by LGA, which is a county government. That is not a state, but we call ourselves a state government. So where is the state at all? And that is why I said, since we still have what I call an interim government, I advocate that we have an interim legislative or the judiciary, an interim, all those. Why is it an interim? The word interim means it's temporary. It's temporary. So once the Southern Cameroon occupy its land, that will cease to exist. That is why it is called an interim government. For those who don't understand what is interim government. Interim government means it's just temporary to supersede the structure of what is going on in Southern Cameroon. Once the Southern Cameroon finally occupy its territory, then that interim government will cease to exist after the new Ambazonia citizen in Ground Zero takes over its command. So in the meantime, we have what they call an interim government. So that is why I said we should have an interim legislative, an interim judiciary, all those three arms of government. Let's say for this currency that I am advocating that we should, which is critically important that we should, if we institute, then the interim Ambazonian, let me back it up again. First, in the United States structure, the U.S. Congress and the Senate are the law-making body of the United States. So in other words, the federal government does not make law. They simply execute the law made by United States Congress and the Senate. So U.S. Congress write the law and have confirmed by the Senate and promulgated by the executive. It becomes the basic foundation for which a federal government must operate. And that is why it is very critical. So we don't want to have this La Republique system of government where decrees are signed by Paul Biya, the almighty omega of life of La Republique. No. So let's look. So on the federal structure, so we have